Good morning. This is Jack Mackinson. Today is Thursday, April 20th at 9:33 a.m. This video is a how-to tutorial on how to build a personal custom computer. And what I'm going to show you is the parts that I used and what they look like. And the second part of the video will be on how to actually install the parts into the case. It's called the order of install. Let me get started right now, and let's go through the parts list. The first part is called an Intel Core i5 6600K 3.50 gigahertz quad core Skylake edition desktop processor. Now the socket is called an LGA 1151, and that determines the size of the CPU and the socket that it goes in. And let me show you what that looks like. Okay, there's a picture of it, and it's on a microchip board, and that's the processor itself. And I'll show you later where it goes in and how it goes in. Okay. The next part is called, this is the memory, or the RAM. It's called Random Access Memory. And I use a G-Skill Ripjaws B-Series 16 gigabyte, and I use two 8 gigabyte sticks. Now this is DDR4, and now that's the latest and greatest of the memory. And let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. Okay. Those are two sticks, or, that's what I call them, and they're 8 gigabytes a piece, which comes to 16 gigabytes. I need that much memory to run my programs, and I do video editing, and that helps a lot with that. Okay, the next one is my solid state drive. Now, this is a special chip. It's called an M2 edition of the actual solid state hard drive, and the maker is Samsung, and it's called an 850 Evo, and it's got 250 gigabytes, which is a substantial amount of space, especially to store videos. And let me let you know what that looks like. Okay, it's about the size of a stick of gum, and that's the actual SSD, and it goes onto the motherboard instead of an external drive, which I like much better. Okay, the next part is the actual motherboard that goes into the case that holds the CPU, the CPU fan, the memory, and the actual solid state drive. And let me show you what that looks like. Okay, that's what it looks like, and the CPU sits right here in this slot, and the CPU cooler goes on top of that to keep the temperature down. Sometimes it can get very hot. These two slots are for your memory, or RAM, and I put the two 8 gigabyte sticks onto that. And over here you'll see some slots. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you can put on what they call add-on cards to bypass the onboard video and the audio. You can put a video card in here or a sound card. And that's what the motherboard looks like. The next one is the actual case itself. It's called a Corsair Carbide 200R Compact ATX case. Now let me show you what that looks like. Okay, that's the case itself, and it has a panel on both sides, and they come off, so you can put the parts into the computer on the motherboard. And it has 3 drive bays. Now I use the top one to put my optical drive in. I like to put it up on the top bay because it has a cleaner look to it. Okay, the last thing I'll put into the case is called the power supply, and this is called an EVGA 430 watt power supply, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, here's the power supply at first. Now this is the back end, and this goes on the bottom of the case towards the back end, and it takes 4 screws to hold it in. And these are the power cords. The power goes to the motherboard, and it goes to one goes to the optical drive. That's the power to it, and it has another cable for any other external drives. Okay, and that's it for the parts. Okay, now what I'm going to go to is now the actual install, and this is the order of install. Now the first thing I do is I prep the case. Now what that means is I take the panels off and take out the there's a little package in there that holds the screws for the motherboard, and it contains some nylon wire ties to clean up the cables after you've installed everything. Okay, the next thing I install is the DVD CD burner, and this allows me to play DVDs, and I can burn to the DVDs or CD, and I put this in the top bay in front of the case in one of the panels. Okay, the next thing I do is there's 2 choices you can have to install the solid state drive. You can get the actual solid state drive that's the normal size of an SSD, and you can put it in one of the bays inside the mother case, in the case itself. But what I'm using is what they call an M2 SD solid state drive, and that goes right on the motherboard. The next thing I do is I install the power supply, and as I said before, it goes into the bottom of the case towards the back end of the case, and it's attached with 4 screws, and it has the power cables running out of the front of it. The next thing I do is I install the I/O shield. Now the I/O shield goes into the back of the case, and it just pops in, and what it does is it allows the ports on the motherboard to go through, and that the ports are for your keyboard, mouse, your USB ports, your audio, your video, and what they call Ethernet or internet connection if you hardwire the internet to it. Okay, the next thing I do is I prep the motherboard, and what I do is I take the motherboard out of the packaging and I set it on top of the box for anti-static reasons. And what I do is I install the central processing unit called the CPU, and I install the cooling fan on top of that. And then I install the M2 solid state drive onto the motherboard. And lastly, I install the RAM or the memory, and I'll show you what that looks like later. Okay. The next thing I do is I install the cabling. There's a connector for the rear fan that goes onto the motherboard, and the power supply that goes to the motherboard itself to power the system. One is a 24 pin, and the other one is an 8 pin. And I'll show you on the motherboard where those connectors and cables go. Okay, the next thing I do is I connect the optical drive, what they call SATA, and that's the speed of the cabling and of the optical drive itself, and it's called a data cable, and I'll show you where it goes onto the motherboard. Okay, the next thing I do is install the front panel audio connector. This is a 4-pin connector, and it'll show you on the motherboard. It's marked for the connector that the cable goes into. The next thing I do, and this is a little complicated and in-depth, but what I do is I connect what they call the front panel umbilical cables. Now these cables are attached to the front panel, and there's some ports on the front of it and some switches. I have some USB connectors, and I have the power switch. There's an LED drive, LED, and it flashes when it indicates that the hard drive is working. And I have a reset button, and then there's a power LED that shows when the actual computer is turned on. And lastly, there's 2 things I do is I update the BIOS. Now the BIOS is a a software that goes onto the motherboard that runs the system, and I upgraded that to the latest release of that software. The next thing I do is install the operating system, and that I use Linux. You can use Microsoft Windows or Mac, whatever you choose to do. Okay, now let me show you a couple of images of what the motherboard looks like. And let me pull up that the motherboard itself. Okay, that's the motherboard. And these are all the slots and or connectors that the cables go to. Now I'm going to go through each one of them and show you where those cables go. The first one is, these are the back panel ports that I was talking about. If you use a cable for your keyboard and mouse, there's a USB port. I use a wireless, so over here there's a USB port that the connector for the wireless keyboard and mouse go. The next one is a VGA monitor connector, and here's an HDMI port for if you have a monitor that has an HDMI cable. And I've already discussed the USB. And this is a USB 3.0 LAN. LAN is for what they call Ethernet or Internet connector that goes from your modem for your Internet to the actual port on the back. And then there's another set of connectors for the audio. Now you can connect your speakers to it, your headphones, microphones, and that's about it for that. Okay, there's another connector called a system fan. And on the back of the case, there's a fan that keeps the inside of the case cooler. And that cable goes to this connector. This is the 8-pin 12-volt power connector that I was talking to you about. And let me go down here a little bit. This is a socket for the actual CPU and the cooler. And there's a cable on that. Once you install it, that goes to what they call a CPU fan connector. And that's where that goes. Now over here, there's some slots. And these slots are for your memory, or sometimes called RAM. And the series I use is, I use two 8 gigabyte sticks. And I use slot 1 and slot 3. This is slot 2 and slot 4. Now you have to put them in pairs, and you use the there's odd and evens. I use, like I said, slot 1 and slot 3. Okay. Now over here is the 24-pin power connector, and that goes here. There's two USB 3.0 connectors for the front panel. And over here is the SATA connectors. And now this goes from the optical drive, and if you have an external solid-state drive, those cables would go here. Okay. These pins down here are for the front panel. They're pretty detailed, and I'll show you a little bit later where those cables go. Okay. Now up here is what they call PCI slots. And what you can do here is you can insert an add-on video card or audio card. And I don't use them, but I can at a later date. I usually use the onboard VGA and audio. Okay. Down here is a couple of other USB connectors. If you have some external USB devices, you can hook up to them. And this is for the front panel audio. On the front of the panel, there's some jacks or connectors for your audio. You can also plug speakers, headphones, and microphones on them. And it's clearly marked, front, F, and audio. Okay, now I'm going to go to these front panel connectors. And what I have is what they call a pinout. Okay, this is an exploded view of these connectors down here. Now, the front panel has the umbilical cables that come out that attach to the motherboard right here, and this is what, like I said, I call the pinout, and the cables go to power or indicate the lights on the front of the computer, and the power switch and the reset button. The first one is the power LED that lights up the light on the front of the computer when you turn on the computer and lets you know that the system is on. And this one is for the actual power switch itself. Now, take note that these cables have a positive and a negative, and you need to put those in corresponding connector on the motherboard that clearly marked that it's power, positive and negative. And there's the hard drive activity LED, and those blink that lets you know that the hard drive is working. And this is for the reset. Now, the reset is what they call a soft boot, to turn your computer off, and then it'll restart again. If you turn on the power switch and hold it, it goes into complete turn off, and it's called a hard boot. So that's it. If you have any questions, PM me or email me, and I'll be glad to answer all your questions, any of your questions, and I hope you enjoyed the video.